Hey everybody, and welcome to my third of 3 videos on this, the Nikon D100. In the first video we talked about what everything was, in the second video we talked about what everything does, and in this video we're going to go over the entire menu system. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is go over how the menu system is laid out. To enter the menu system, you hit the menu button right here. Then we're going to start here on the left side. You can see a column of tabs: Playback, Shooting, CSM, and Setup menu. So over here are the tabs that we've just seen. To scroll up and down them, of course, after you're in, you just use up and down on the command wheel. To get into an item, you hit left, and then up and down to select what you want to modify, and then I guess actually right to select what you want to modify. I'm looking at this from upside down. Up and down to select the thing, and then left to get back to the column. Right enters the items, left gets back to the tabs. So in the playback menu, the first item that we have is delete. Okay, we're going to go to delete and we're going to hit enter just to enter it and see what it does. It allows me to delete either selected or all photos. Let's delete all the photos. Gives me the chance to back out. No, let's delete all the photos. Green light over here on the memory card indicates that it's active and doing stuff. It's done. There we go. Now that there are no photos on the memory card, delete is no longer accessible. The next item is folder designation. I'm going to hit the right button to enter in here. So the options are new and folder select. So if you want to create a new folder, you can do that through here. And if you want to select an existing folder, you can do that through there. So anyway, it's just, or you can just let the camera deal with the folders and as they may, and then deal with everything when you get back to your computer. That's what I do. Do whatever works best for you. We'll back out here. Next, below that, since I can't, now that I've deleted the photos, I have messed up this whole thing. This video's starting so well. Okay, next one down is slideshow. That allows you to play a slideshow of all the photos on the CF card. Hide image allows you to hide an image from being played back. And print set allows you to access your printing order I think you can also print directly from the camera that way. I've never in my life hooked a camera up to a printer, so I'm not the guy to tell you what the print set does. And then the last one is display mode. We're going to enter that. And display mode tells you what all you can see when you play back your image. Image only, image with histogram, image with highlight warning, and image with both histogram and highlight warning. This is a matter of personal preference, what you select and what information you want to have during playback when you look at your images. And that is the entire playback menu. One of the things I love about these old cameras is just how easy it is to go through the menu and set everything up. All right, next one is shooting menu. So we're going to start here. The first thing I have listed is ISO, so that's where we're going to start. ISO allows you to access the ISO and manually select it. It's the exact same thing that we saw in video 2 on this top command wheel here where we selected a different ISO. So that's it. That's exactly what this does. Next one down is called image sharpening, and this allows you to do some image sharpening: auto, normal, low, high, or none. So I can't tell you whether or not this affects the RAW and TIFF files. It will affect the JPEGs. My best guess is that it will, at minimum for the RAWs, will not affect those. In general, I would recommend leaving this to none, even though this is only 6 megapixels. Because this is 6 megapixels, any sort of image sharpening is really going to look artificial and stand out. So if you set this to none, you will be able to do a little bit more sharpening in post, and you'll have a little bit more control over how that looks. Next one down is tone compensation. And what this allows you to do is select between auto, less contrast, more contrast, and custom. So basically what you can do is, I don't trust any camera to do something like an auto tone composition or something like that. There are a handful of auto features I will trust. This is not going to be one of them, especially on a 20-year-old camera. So what you can do is set normal contrast, less contrast, more contrast, or you can customize it. Let's see what the customization looks like. I'm really not sure how you're going to adjust the custom on that. That might be one of those things that if I still had photos on the memory card, it would use that. That's my best guess. I don't know why it isn't going into that. Anyway, I'm just going to leave this on normal. That's probably going to give you the best results. Okay, color. So the next item up is color mode. We have three options: sRGB, Adobe RGB, and sRGB. Very confusing that there's two sRGBs, 1 and 3. So let's go through these. The first one, sRGB, is for portraits to be printed without modification. So if you're going to take portraits and you're just going to print them straight from the camera, like let's say you're working at an amusement park or something like that, and you're not going to go and photo edit all of the 3,000 people you photographed that day. What you're going to do is you're going to hook this up to a printer and you're going to print them, and they're not going to be edited. That's sRGB 1. Adobe RGB is used for taking images in Adobe RGB, and that has more color capabilities, but it doesn't play well outside of the Adobe ecosystem. So if you're not into the Adobe ecosystem, do not use Adobe RGB. And the third one is standard RGB, but it's for nature and landscape shots that are going to be printed without modification. So if you shoot mostly portraits, you want to use 1. If you shoot mostly landscapes, you want to shoot 3. Hue adjustment. What this is going to let you do is adjust the hue in your images in terms of degrees, up to 9 or probably -9. So that'll allow you to hue shift. This would be good for, let's say, that if your sensor is getting old and starting to have some issues with the hue, or if you want to adjust the hue for creative benefit, or if you're having trouble getting an exact white balance in very complicated lighting and want to shift the hue just a little bit, you can do that. Next is Bank Select. Bank Select brings up banks A and B. What this does is this allows you to store two separate files or two separate sets of custom functions, A and B. So let's say that you are going to shoot portraits and landscapes. Those are the two things you're going to shoot for a living. Bank A could be portraits. You could shoot sRGB 1 as your bank A setting, as well as all the others you want to use for portraits. Bank B, whenever you go out to shoot a landscape, just switch it to bank B. You're going to use 3 sRGB for landscapes, and then all the other landscape settings that we're going to see. And there you go. That's what this is for, just having two different sets of custom functions. Image quality brings up the image quality menu, just like we saw when we accessed it through the dial on the top. Here are your options. So raw, NEF, and then now since I've selected raw, I can select compressed RAW or uncompressed RAW. We're just going to go with uncompressed. This is a 6 megapixel sensor. Resolution, if you are not in RAW. So let's go back up here and let's select, see if TIFF is one of these that'll work. Yeah, we can select the resolution in TIFF and then the 3 JPEG settings. Low, medium, and high, or low, medium, and small rather. I don't have written down what it is, but this is the size of or large, medium, and small. These are the sizes of your images. Large is going to be the full sensor. Medium will probably be like 3 megapixels, and small is probably going to be about 1 or less. So if you're shooting RAW, you don't get these. You only get the data straight off the sensor. But in your raster formats, you can select that if you want to. Generally going to select just shooting RAW. If you've come to a digital SLR of any age for any reason, you probably aren't coming to it to shoot like 3 megapixel JPEGs. So this, back in the day, back in 20 years ago, when memory was very expensive relative to today, and back when computers lacked the power to process 30, 40, 50 megapixel photos rapidly, even 6 megapixel photos rapidly, it made sense to have the ability to shoot smaller files. This is going to be your white balance, and this is the last item we're going to look at in this menu. And it's the exact same thing as we saw when we looked at the white balance setting up here on the dial. Quite honestly, I don't know why they put these in the menu as well as having them on the dial. I find that curious and kind of indicative of the way that cameras hadn't really been defined what they should be and how they should look when this was made. Now we're back to ISO. So we're going to go back left and into the tabs and down to the CSM menu. CSM menu has a bunch of different things in it. Let me find out how many. 26 custom functions. Okay. Number 1 is menu reset. So if you wanted to reset your menu and start from scratch because you just got this camera, that's what you would do. Number 2 is bank select, which is weird because it was in the other menu as well, but this allows you to come into the CSM menu, the custom settings menu, and select your bank of custom functions. This next one down is your image review, which allows you to turn image review on or off. This is a matter of personal preference. Do you want to, yes, see an image displayed on the screen after you take it, or no? With cameras like this, I mean, it's also a matter of battery preservation. This isn't a particularly battery-hungry camera, but as a matter of personal preference to maximize my battery life, I always turn this off because I don't want the screen turning on and wasting battery power that I could use to take photos. Item 1 is no CF card. Your options are on or off. With off, your camera will, with off, your camera will fire if you don't have a CF card. It won't save any photos, but it'll fire. And with on, your camera will not fire. What this does is it disables the shutter. So if you turn it on, your shutter is disabled when there's no CF card. And what this does is this makes it really easy to check and say, hey, did I remember to put a CF card in? Let me try taking a photo. And if it doesn't take a photo and you have this set on, you know that it's because you didn't put a CF card in. Item number 3 is going to be your ISO auto, basically off or on. Do you want to have the ability to use ISO auto, yes or no? Weird that they didn't just put it, I guess, but like I said a few minutes ago, this camera's 20 years old. You are kind of getting a glimpse into how 20 years ago, no one knew how these things should really be laid out. Everyone was just kind of putting them together and hoping they would work. Item number 4 is going to be your long exposure noise reduction, off or on. I could not tell you exactly what shutter speed this kicks on at, but what this does is believe that this will take a second photo, a second long exposure, and then look at the two of them and cancel out the noise in the image it keeps. I believe that is how this one works. Anyway, on or off, it's just a matter of personal preference. I tend to leave this off, and long exposures tend to have a little bit less noise generally, as long as you're not using the camera over and over. This also, if this does take a second exposure, like I believe it does, you do not want to have this during your star trails because you'll end up with huge gaps in your star trails photos. 5 is your file number set. So what you're going to do is file number sequence, on or off. Basically, what this is going to do is have your file numbers be sequential or reset with the file folder. You can manually reset it as well, or you can leave it on. In general, I recommend leaving this to on, because if your files go from 0001 to 9999, it's a whole lot harder to overwrite them when you save them to your computer than if you have 3 versions of 0001 on your CF card. Number 6 is monitor off. And basically, this is how long until the monitor turns off after you push the monitor button. 10 seconds up to 10 minutes. This is just a matter of personal preference and battery preservation. For these videos, I always set it to the longest one, but in general, with my own camera, I usually have it at 1 minute. 7 is auto meter off. So this is how long is the meter going to stay on after you have to press the shutter. I like 16 seconds as a matter of personal preference, but whichever one you select is a matter of what you like and battery preservation. So 8 seconds is good, 4 and 6 kind of seem a little bit short, and 30 is very long, but with different uses and different situations, different times may be valuable. Number 8 is self-timer. Here it is, self-timer. Okay, and basically this is going to let you set how long you want the self-timer to be. And that's the self-timer that we controlled in the second video up here with the drive mode switch. 2, 5, 10, or 20 seconds. Matter of personal preference and what you're doing. If you have a long way to go to get in front of that camera for your selfie, you might want 20 seconds. But if you're only doing something like tabletop photos and you just want to make sure that there's no shake in the camera when you take the photo, 2 or 5 might be enough, and you can get more photos in during the day that way. 9 is EV steps. It's going to be a third or a half. This is a matter of personal preference and how accurate you want things to be. A third of a stop is going to be, say, the difference between 1/100th of a second, 1/125th, 1/160th, and 1/200th as your shutter speeds versus 1/100th, 1/150th, and 1/200th. This would apply to aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, I believe, for all three of these. And we saw this with the ISO when we were scrolling through. It went 200, 250, 320, 400. So we knew from that it was set to third steps. Exposure compensation right here, and you have two options, off and on. With off, you must use the exposure compensation button to perform exposure compensation. With on, you can do exposure compensation from the command wheel, which means that if you are in program, aperture priority, or shutter priority, your command wheel, whichever one you're not using, with on will perform exposure value compensation. With off, you can only do it if you press down the EV compensation button on the top up here. Matter of personal preference and how you want your camera to behave on this one. Number 11 is bracket set. So this has a few different options. AE flash, white balance. Okay, so with AE and flash, when you bracket photos and you have a flash attached to your camera, you're in program mode, your camera will use shutter speed, aperture, and flash power, or any combination of those three to perform your bracketing. So if you remember from the second video, you could take one shot under, proper, and over. In program mode, the variables with that are flexible to what the camera wants to use. AE only. If you have a flash on your camera, the flash will not be used in program mode for bracketing exposure control, only aperture priority and, aperture setting and shutter speed. Flash only will only use flash power when you have a flash on the camera to control bracketing settings. And white balance, what this does is this turns your bracketing mode from an exposure bracket into a white balance bracket. So if you, let's say, don't know what kind of lighting you have, you could select white balance bracketing and get 3 different results, and that would give you the ability to then find out what type of lighting you have, or have 2 interesting color cast shots and one that turns out well, or you could intentionally use this instead to create different color tones in your images. Personally, I don't want the flash power being adjusted. I do when I use flash, which is not all that often, I do all of the flash controls manually, so I'm very particular about how powerful the flash is going to be. So I tend to just leave this to AE, but this is a matter of personal preference how you want to have that set. This is your bracketing order, and so there are 2 different ways to do bracketing order. Metered under over, which is proper exposure, underexposure, overexposure, or underexposed, metered over. Matter of personal preference on this, how you want this set up. I personally like the second one. I just find that easier to spot on a photo reel, and I also find it a little bit easier to figure out where one ends and the next begins, because the difference between them is much greater. If you're shooting 3 photos that are off by 1/3 of a stop each, this top one, it's going to be harder to figure out where your bracketing sequences start and stop when you look at your photos on your computer. But this is just a matter of personal preference and how you want to see these on your computer. Number 13 is command dial, and this allows you to adjust how your command dials work. So up here we've got off, which is your main is shutter and your sub is aperture. I think that is, let's see. On, main is aperture and sub is shutter. So main is the one on the front, sub is the one on the back. This is a matter of personal preference of whether you want this to control your shutter or your aperture. In general, I go with the one on the back controlling the shutter and the one on the front controlling the aperture, for the very simple reason that this is on the shutter side of the camera and this is on the aperture side of the camera, and that makes it easy for me to remember which dial does which. Because I have a bunch of different cameras, I have them all set up the same way. It was very confusing when I didn't used to have them all set up the same way. So at any rate, however you want to have your camera operate is fine and good. Just make sure it's consistent and you know what to expect. Item number 14 is This is the bane of my existence when making these videos. This is my least favorite part of making these digital videos. I'm not going to lie. This is the AEL-AFL control button, and that's this one right up here. So when we go in here, we have a bunch of different options. AEL-AFL lock is the top one, and what that does is that when you have to press the shutter button, I'm sorry, when you push this button right here, all of this affects how this button behaves. With this first option, that locks both the auto exposure and the autofocus. So let's say, for instance, you're taking a portrait photo. That would be the one you'd want to use. Your subject isn't moving, so it's okay that your focus is locked. And you probably have steady lighting, so it's okay that your exposure is locked. If you're shooting a soccer game, that's a terrible idea because your subject could run in and out of shade. They could easily run toward or away from you, and your focus and your exposure would be locked. The second one here is AE locks only the auto exposure, and it works as a toggle button. So toggle being like a light switch. Flip it up to turn it on, flip it down to turn it off. Press it once to turn it on, press it a second time to turn it off. And what this does is this only locks your exposure. Your autofocus will continue to focus as designed after you press this. So that's the way I generally have it set up. This third one is AF locks on AF, but it's a toggle button again. So with the third option, instead of locking the exposure, it locks focus. That way, if you know that, for instance, you have a subject who's moving left to right in a horizontal line, like a race car or a racehorse, right? But over here they're in light and over here they're in shadow, and you want to just get a series of that horse running so that you know you get at least one or two good shots. You could use this third option, and when they're over here, they'll be in focus and exposed properly, and when they're over here, they'll still be in focus and exposed properly with using that toggle switch to lock your focus. This also works really well if you have a subject going horizontally and somebody, like if you're in the grandstands of a soccer game, might stand up in front of you and their head gets in your way. This next one is number 4. This is AE hold, which is hold, not toggle. So this works exactly like number 2, where this button locks the auto exposure, but it's a hold button, not a toggle switch. And then this last one is called AF on. And what this does is your button turns the autofocus on and off instead of the shutter button turning your autofocus on and off. And this is, and it also turns on predictive focusing when it's pressed. So for those of you who, when you hold your camera like this, you want to use your thumb to control your autofocus, this last one is the one to select. So, yeah, all of these are just a matter of what kind of situations you shoot in, how you want your camera to behave, and there's no wrong answer for this, just so long as you know exactly what to expect. Number 15 is AE lock. Oh yes, okay. This is so convoluted. All right, so AE lock, when we go in here, this gives you two options of the way that AE lock is going to behave. We just talked about how this button works and how it can control AE lock. If this button is controlling AE lock in any way, shape, or form, you now have two options. Your AE auto exposure lock button behaves as described above. Okay, so that's off. If number 15 is off, your auto exposure lock button will be controlled in auto exposure lock mode by the parameters in custom function 14. If it's on, your shutter button will also perform auto exposure lock when half pressed. So with this setting, do you want to have your shutter button perform exposure lock when you half press it? Yes or no? If yes, turn it to on. If no, set it to off. Number 16 is your LCD illumination. So off and any button. So with off, we had this LCD illumination button up here that we saw briefly and not very brightly at all in the first button. With this set to off, only this button will turn on the LCD illumination. With this set to on, any button you press will turn on the LCD illumination. This is a matter of personal preference, but quite frankly, I'm not going to lie, the idea of that thing glowing green every time I press a button. Really annoying. So I would recommend leaving this to off, just so that every time you hold your eye up here, you don't have this green light suddenly turning on in your other eye whenever you're using this. So at any rate, number 17 is focus area, and your options here are off and on. Off means no wrap, on means wrap. So what does this basically mean? When you select your focus area, does the screen wrap? Like if you have a focus area over here that you want to get to, but you're set to the one on the far side, with on, you can just push to the right and you're over here. With off, you would have to scroll all the way back across. It's just a matter of personal preference and how you want your camera to operate. 18 is autofocus area illumination. Auto, off, and on. That should be on. Basically, do you want your camera to automatically determine when your autofocus area should illuminate in your viewfinder? Do you never want it to, or do you always want it to and this applies to when focus is confirmed? It's just a matter of personal preference and the amount of information that you want coming to you from your camera in your viewfinder. Number 19 is the grid display on or off. And what the grid display does is turn on the grid. So I never even noticed this, but the grid display does turn on a grid inside the viewfinder. And it's a rule of third grids, but with a large circular area in the middle. That circular area corresponds to the center weighted metering area. So it's a fairly useful thing. So this is a matter of personal preference and what you want to see in your viewfinder. I personally like a grid. It helps me get my horizon lines level, verticals and buildings vertical, things like that. I find it very useful to have a rule of thirds compositional aid in my viewfinder as well when it comes to creating photos. Number 20 is your dynamic autofocus in autofocus servo. So basically what this does is off or on. Off is disable, on is enable your closest subject priority. So this is basically, let's say you had a row of 5 people running toward you and you were set to off. Who knows which one of those 5 the camera would pick to focus on. But if you set this to on, the closest person running toward you would be the one who was in focus. So let's say you were shooting a wedding photo, right? What you could do is you could set up your photo with the bride and the maids of honor or whatever and have them like walking a bit behind her or something like that toward the camera. Then the bride would be in focus and the maids of honor might be a little bit out of focus, but it's the bride's day, so that's okay. Matter of personal preference on this, how you want your camera to behave and what type of settings you're going to be shooting in. Custom function 21 is your, dynamic autofocus in AF continuous. So basically, I take it back. When I said in the previous one, if you had subjects walking toward you, that's this mode, because this is continuous autofocus. In the previous one, it's if you have stationary subjects. So this is a good one, number 21 here, to have, number 21, for the people walking or running towards the camera. Number 20 is really good if you have like 5 stationary objects set up on your tabletop and you're doing a still life. So just goofed on the 2 autofocus modes there. But same principle applies, matter of personal preference. Number 22 is your autofocus area. No, autofocus assist. So this is your autofocus assist light, on or off. Do you want that white light on the front to turn on when you don't have enough light for autofocus to find focus as it is? On is fine if you're like in a forest at night trying to photograph bats, I don't know, whatever. On might not be fine if you're at your kid's play. So that's why you can turn this off if you need to. Number 23 is your flash mode. Your options are DTTL and manual. So DTTL, what that does is that uses your through the lens metering to trigger with your flashes. So the light meter on this takes light that comes through the lens to calculate your exposure. With DTTL, this will use that information to calculate how powerful the flash needs to be to get a proper exposure. This will work with most Nikon flashes. I couldn't tell you if the ones being released now 20 years later will work with that or not. I don't own a single Nikon flash. But what that will do is allow you with compatible Nikon flashes to use flash power to control and light meter readings to let the camera control flash power to obtain a proper exposure. With M, you get to do that all yourself. So let's say you have no Nikon flashes. You're using only third-party flashes and they are not compatible with DTTL. Set it to manual and then manually set in your flash power settings. So this is going to be a matter of what type of flashes you use, whether they're compatible with this mode, who makes them, things like that. Item number 24, and I think this is the last one, is called anti-shock. Okay, on and off. Basically what this does is when you have this on, it delays the shutter firing for a moment after the mirror rises to prevent camera shake in sensitive images like macro work. So if you do macro work, or you're using this to photograph teeth because you're a dentist, or you're even doing star trails or waterfalls, this is basically like a shorter than 2-second self-timer. The mirror goes up, the camera's like, cool, I'll let any motion from it work its way out of the system, and then I'll take a photo. If you're shooting sports or just walking around or something like that, leave this to off because that delay is going to be annoying. And that is it for the custom functions. So our next and final menu is called the setup menu. Okay, and for this one, we're going to first go here. This is format, and what this does is format the CF card. It doesn't just erase the photos on it, it wipes it. So if you use this CF card in multiple cameras, this camera should not erase photos it didn't take, but formatting it will erase those photos. If you're having problems with a CF card when you put it in also, and you know there aren't any images on it or any files you need to save, try formatting it and see if the camera recognizes it a bit better. LCD brightness, you have a few different options here, which are as bright as 2 and as dim as -2. So this is a matter of where you're going to be shooting. If you're outside, it makes a lot of sense to have 2. If you're in a museum, it probably makes a lot of sense to have -2. If it's nighttime, even though that's outside, you probably still want -2. Just know with this, by the way, the brighter the screen, the faster it's going to drain your battery. Mirror lockup mode is only for sensor cleaning. And if I recall correctly, this camera must be plugged in order for mirror lockup mode to be accessible for sensor cleaning. And that's it. So because I don't have a wired connection for this camera, I cannot use mirror lockup mode on it. After mirror lockup, the next one is video output. So if we go in here, you can choose between NTSC and PAL. This is not for recording videos. This camera cannot record videos. If you remember on the side of this side of the camera, there was that video output port for connecting to an analog camera, an analog cable to a TV. If you are in North America or another NTSC region, you select that. If you're in the UK and Europe or another PAL region, you select that. Last is date setup. This allows you to set the date, year, date, time, all of that stuff as you see fit. Not quite sure how it's going to let me do that. There we go. Anyway, I'm not going to set the date. And then let's see. Next up is language. So language, these are the different languages you can select from. Back in the day, there was not an extensive list of languages. So we've got German, English, French, looking like Japanese would make sense, and Spanish. So next one is image comment. This allows you to manually enter comments into images. So you could go into your images. I don't have any on this camera right now, so I can't show them to you. And enter a comment like keep or fun or whatever you need to communicate to yourself later. It's not an easy thing to do, but you can do it. And then your last option here is USB control, mass storage or peer-to-peer. If you are going to use your camera to connect your USB cable to connect to your computer to transfer files, you need to have this in mass storage. Honestly, not having ever connected a camera directly to my computer, I couldn't tell you what the process is other than that. And with that, we are back to LCD brightness, which was the first item in this last menu. And that's the last piece of paper I have to read, which means this is in fact the end of the video. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope that even though there were a handful of goofs in this, that it was still helpful in helping you understand what your different settings are and how to make the most from your D100.